My sister looked me straight in the eye and said, "Claire, you don't fit the vibe of my wedding." I had paid for that wedding. Every flower, every chair, every drop of champagne was bought with my money. Yet, in her world, I was nothing more than an eyesore to be erased. The laughter of our relatives echoed around me, each smirk cutting deeper than a knife. They thought I would cry, beg, or walk away in shame. But they didn't know. I had been planning my silence, and the first domino had already begun to fall. I used to believe that love, sacrifice, and loyalty would eventually be enough. My father died when I was 11, leaving me, my mother, and a fragile sense of family behind. A year later, she remarried, and soon after came Ivy, my half-sister. From the moment she was born, I was told it was my duty to protect her, to help her grow, to give her everything I could. And I did. I was 14 and already changing diapers, cooking meals, covering for my mother's exhaustion. By the time I was 18, I was less a sister and more a second parent. College should have been my chance to escape. I had earned a scholarship out of state, the first real opportunity of my life. But when my mother said there wasn't enough money to cover Ivy's private school tuition, I folded. I stayed behind, worked 2 jobs, and gave up the chance to see the world beyond our suffocating little town. I told myself it was temporary, that sacrifices would be remembered, that one day my devotion would mean something. But sacrifices have a way of turning invisible. The more you give, the more people assume you owe them. Years bled together. I paid for Ivy's cheerleading uniforms, her dance recitals, her endless list of hobbies and whims. I watched my savings vanish, the future I once dreamed of dissolving like smoke. I convinced myself it was worth it each time she smiled at me, each time she leaned against me like I was her safe place. In those moments, I was more mother than sister. Still, reality crept in. When I fell in love for the first time with a boy who dreamed of moving west, I let him go because Ivy was preparing for college and someone had to foot the bills. He told me, "Claire, you can't keep living for everyone else." But I did, and the years passed. I aged, while Ivy bloomed. By the time she was 26, she was the dazzling centerpiece of every room she walked into. Long hair that shimmered, skin flawless, charm dripping off her every word. She learned early that beauty could be traded like currency, and she wielded it ruthlessly. Our mother and stepfather adored her, showering her with attention and excuses. "She's special," they would say, as though the rest of us were background noise. When Ivy met Nathan, the wealthy son of a family whose name opened doors in every corner of the city, she soared higher than ever. Suddenly, our mother was talking about dinner parties, society connections, and a future where Ivy would be untouchable. Claire, the provider, the sister who had held the family together for decades, was nowhere in those dreams. Ivy's disdain grew sharper as Nathan became more serious. She corrected the way I spoke, rolled her eyes at my clothes, laughed at my modest apartment. She called me the family's embarrassing shadow, words whispered behind my back but loud enough to reach me through relatives. I had thought she might one day outgrow her cruelty, that she might remember the nights I stayed up sewing her costumes, the mornings I skipped meals so she could eat. But memory is fickle, and gratitude is fragile. One evening, as we sat in the living room, she looked at me with eyes cold as glass. "You've done enough, Claire," she said. "Honestly, you're kind of a burden now. Nathan's family, they don't understand why you still hang around." Her words cut deeper than any knife. A burden. Me, the one who had raised her like she was my own. I opened my mouth to respond, but the weight of years pressed down on me, choking the words before they could escape. Our mother sat silently beside her, saying nothing, her silence ringing louder than Ivy's insult. I went to bed that night replaying it over and over, her smirk, the dismissal in her tone. And yet, I told myself it was a passing cruelty, that perhaps she didn't mean it, that surely, in her heart, she remembered who had always been there. But the truth is, Ivy thrived in the role she had been given, the golden child. She was born into applause, nurtured with indulgence, and she wore entitlement like a crown. She learned early that my sacrifices weren't gifts, they were obligations, and obligations can be discarded when they no longer serve. When the wedding invitations went out, they were gilded in gold, delivered in thick envelopes that whispered prestige. Every cousin, every distant relative, every family friend received one. But when I checked my mailbox, there was nothing. I waited a week, then two, convincing myself it was a mistake. Finally, I asked my mother. Her face tightened, then softened into pity. "Claire," she said gently, "Ivy decided to keep the guest list very selective. It's a high society event, and, well, she thought maybe you wouldn't fit the vibe." The words hit harder than any blow. Not fit the vibe. After decades of sacrifice, of pouring myself hollow to fill her life with light, I wasn't even considered worthy of standing in the same room. My son, her own nephew, was excluded too. We were erased. I walked away that night with my throat burning, my hands trembling. All those years, all that loyalty, reduced to nothing. And in that silence, a seed planted itself deep inside me. A seed of something I had never allowed myself to feel before: vengeance. The invitation arrived 2 weeks later, though it felt less like an invitation and more like a declaration that I did not belong. The envelope was heavy, embossed with gold trim, perfumed faintly as if even the scent had been chosen to intimidate. My name was printed neatly, but not my son's. There was no +1, no acknowledgement that I was part of a family at all. Just Claire. Written like a formality, an afterthought. Ivy called me that evening, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Claire, I know you must be surprised, but the wedding is very curated. We want it to feel intimate, you know? Exclusive. It's really about the right vibe. Don't take it personally. You'll understand when you see how beautiful it is." My throat burned as I gripped the phone. "So your nephew isn't welcome? My son?" She sighed dramatically. "Claire, please. Children ruin the aesthetic, and honestly, you don't need to bring him. This isn't really your world." I nearly dropped the phone. This wasn't my world? I had financed half of that world. The flowers, the catering deposits, even the down payment on the venue. I had signed those checks. But I swallowed the fury rising in me because anger in that moment would have been wasted. When I told my mother, her eyes darted away. "Don't ruin her big day, Claire. Be mature. It's just one night. Let Ivy have her happiness." Their words were knives, each one sharper than the last. I wanted to scream, to expose the truth of every sacrifice I had made, but instead I pressed my lips together until they ached. Silence filled the room like smoke. And yet, silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes, silence is strategy. The day of the wedding arrived in a blur of glossy photographs and whispered gossip. The venue was extravagant: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, fountains cascading in the garden. Guests paraded in sequined gowns and tailored suits, their laughter echoing through the air like the sound of coins spilling from a vault. Everyone seemed to belong. Everyone but me. I hadn't planned to attend, not after the humiliation of the invitation, but I couldn't bring myself to stay away entirely. Not after paying for it. Not after giving away so much of my life. So I came quietly, dressed modestly, holding a small wrapped box with trembling hands. The coordinator glanced at me as though I had stumbled in from the wrong door. She ushered me toward the far edge of the reception hall, past rows of tables dressed in ivory linens, to a cramped seat near the service entrance. My chair was shoved against a wall inches away from the restroom doors. Every time they opened, the scent of disinfectant swept over me, mixing with the clinking of champagne flutes. Guests nearby avoided my gaze as if proximity to me might dull their shine. Ivy floated through the hall like royalty, her dress glittering under the chandeliers. Nathan trailed proudly beside her, his arm linked with hers. When she reached the center stage, she took the microphone, thanking guests for attending, for being part of her perfect day. Then her eyes landed on me. "Oh," she said, feigning surprise, her voice amplified across the room. I didn't expect Claire to actually show up. She's not really family, just leftover responsibility. But she insists on hovering, so welcome, I suppose. Laughter rippled through the crowd, low and cruel. Some guests turned to look at me, whispers flickering like sparks. I felt my face flush hot, my chest tighten, but I stayed rooted to my chair. For years, I had been the quiet background, the shadow she mocked. Tonight, she tried to make me disappear entirely. My hands curled into fists beneath the table, nails biting into my palms. I could hear my heartbeat louder than the music. My first instinct was to run, to vanish and let them think they had won. But something inside me, something long buried under years of obedience, hardened. I forced my lips into a calm, practiced smile, though my insides trembled. Around me, relatives chuckled politely, unwilling to risk Ivy's displeasure. My mother sat near the front, her head bowed, eyes fixed on the tablecloth. She said nothing, did nothing, let her younger daughter humiliate the elder without a flicker of protest. That silence spoke louder than Ivy's cruelty. Ivy continued to bask in the laughter, soaking it in like sunlight. She didn't notice that some guests shifted uncomfortably, that a few eyes darted between her and me with unease. She was too drunk on her own power to see the cracks beginning to spread across the illusion she had built. I drew a slow breath, steadying myself. My silence wasn't weakness, it wasn't surrender. It was patience sharpening into something far more dangerous. And that's when it happened. A voice cut through the laughter, deep, powerful, commanding, familiar in a way that made the room go still. Enough! The single word cut through the laughter like glass shattering on marble. Every head turned, the sound of forks and glasses stilling midair. I looked up, startled, and saw him, Lucas Hale. He strode forward with quiet authority, his dark suit tailored sharply, his presence commanding more than the chandeliers or the music ever could. His eyes swept the room with a kind of cold precision before they landed on me. "Claire," he said warmly, extending a hand. "Why didn't you tell me you were here? I've been looking for you." A stunned silence fell. I blinked, confusion tightening my chest. Lucas? I hadn't seen him in years. He was older now, his jaw sharper, his confidence heavier. But there was no mistaking him. Once, long ago, we had worked side by side when he was still just a young man fighting to make ends meet. He bent slightly, offering his arm as though escorting royalty. I hesitated, the weight of dozens of eyes pressing against me before placing my hand on his. Instantly, the air shifted. Guests who had been smirking moments before straightened in their seats, their laughter dying in their throats. "I'd like to introduce you all properly," Lucas announced, his voice steady, amplified without need for a microphone. "This is Claire. She's not only one of the most capable people I've had the privilege to work with, but also a strategic partner in ventures that matter far more than tonight's celebration." The room rippled with murmurs. Ivy's face froze, the color draining from her cheeks. Nathan shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward his father, who now regarded Lucas with keen interest. "You're joking," Ivy blurted, her voice brittle. "Claire? A partner? That's—" Lucas cut her off with a smile that was somehow polite and devastating at once. "Why would I joke about business?" Ivy's mouth snapped shut, her confidence collapsing under the weight of his authority. The same relatives who had just laughed at me now exchanged uneasy glances. One woman at the table near mine muttered, "Partner? With him?" as though the word itself shifted the balance of the entire evening. I forced my breathing to remain steady, though my heart pounded. I hadn't expected this. Not here, not now. But as I stood at Lucas's side, I felt the suffocating shame of moments ago dissolve, replaced by something I hadn't known in years, dignity. The whispers grew louder. Someone whispered Lucas's name with reverence. "That's Lucas Hale, CEO of Hale International." A man near the front straightened, suddenly aware of just how powerful he was. Even the musicians faltered, their notes hesitating in the air. Ivy tried to recover, plastering on a brittle smile. "Well, what a coincidence." I didn't realize you and Claire even knew each other." Lucas tilted his head. "Oh, we go back further than you'd think. And we've been working closely on new projects. Projects that, incidentally, your future in-laws have been very eager about." Nathan's father stiffened. The words hit the air like a thunderclap. The shift was immediate. People who had avoided my gaze moments earlier now leaned toward me, their expressions softening into politeness, curiosity, even respect. A man in a crisp tuxedo offered his chair. A woman nearby pressed a glass of champagne into my hand as though it had always been mine to take. The humiliation Ivy had carefully crafted was unraveling thread by thread. Ivy stammered, "Claire doesn't belong here. She's—" "Enough," Nathan's father snapped, his tone cold. "If Lucas says she's important, then she is. Show some respect." Ivy's lips parted in shock, her hands trembling as she clutched her gown. For the first time in her charmed life, the spotlight she craved didn't belong to her. I sat, Lucas steady at my side, my posture calm, though inside my mind raced. I had spent years bending, folding, breaking myself for this family, and tonight the scales shifted without me lifting a single weapon. Lucas leaned close enough for only me to hear. "You don't need to say anything. Let them unravel themselves." His words sent a chill down my spine. Was this chance, or was it something more deliberate? His timing was too perfect, his presence too sharp to be coincidence. He wasn't simply rescuing me from humiliation, he was orchestrating something larger. As the evening stumbled forward, the deference toward me only grew. Glasses clinked in my honor, chairs pulled back for me, smiles sharpened with new recognition. Ivy watched with wide, desperate eyes, her perfect world tilting under her feet. She tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked, betraying her panic. For the first time in years, I didn't rush to soften the blow, didn't step aside to protect her pride. I let the silence grow heavy around her, let the whispers coil tighter, squeezing the air she thought belonged only to her. But as I sat there, I realized Lucas's intervention wasn't only about me. The precision of his words, the way he mentioned Nathan's family, the calculated glances he cast, it was too pointed. Ivy thought this was about me. Nathan thought this was about respect. But I could see it in Lucas's eyes, the hidden gleam. He wasn't just saving me, he was playing his own game. When the music resumed that night, the tension never fully settled. Ivy forced smiles, clinking glasses with guests who only moments before had been whispering about me. But her charm faltered, and I could see the panic lurking beneath her powdered face. I stayed silent, exactly as Lucas had advised, though my heart was full of questions. Later, as the hall thinned and the noise dulled to a hum, Lucas found me by the garden doors. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of roses from the elaborate arrangements I had, unknowingly, paid for. He stood beside me with the quiet familiarity of someone who belonged there, though he had only just arrived. "It's been a long time," he said softly. "Yes," I replied, studying him. "You've changed." "So have you." His smile was brief, shadowed by memory. "Do you remember the firm? I was the kid no one wanted, the one always late, fumbling through reports. Everyone wrote me off." I remembered. The office had been brutal, its culture unkind to strugglers. Lucas was young then, eager but lost, often staying late with nothing but vending machine dinners. I had been just a few years older, barely surviving myself, but I had noticed. I remembered sharing my packed lunches with him, sliding them across the desk when he thought no one was watching. I remembered telling him not to quit, not to believe the voices that said he'd never amount to anything. "I never forgot," he said, his voice tightening. "You fed me when I couldn't afford food. You told me to stand when everyone else pushed me down. Claire, you saved me in ways you didn't even realize. Everything I've built, I carried those words with me." A wave of warmth spread through me, cutting through the bitterness of the evening. He hadn't appeared tonight out of romantic impulse or chance. He had come because he remembered a debt, and tonight he chose to repay it. "I didn't save you," I whispered. "You saved yourself." "Maybe," he said, But I wouldn't have, if not for you." The truth was humbling, grounding. For years, I had been invisible to those I loved most. To hear that someone else had seen me, remembered me, carried my kindness into his future, it felt like a wound stitched closed after decades of bleeding. But Lucas's eyes held something sharper than gratitude. "Claire," he said, lowering his voice, "you need to understand. In helping you tonight, I wasn't only honoring the past, I was also drawing something out into the light." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He glanced back toward the glowing hall, where Ivy twirled in her glittering gown, laughing too loudly, her glass trembling in her hand. "People are already talking about the money, about how this entire display was funded. They'll ask where it came from, and when they do, the truth will spread." I stiffened. My savings, my sacrifices, funneled into her fantasy, paraded tonight as though Ivy had spun it out of gold herself. "Lucas," I breathed, realization dawning. "You knew this would happen." He didn't deny it. His silence was enough. "But in helping me," he said finally, his eyes steady on mine, "I was also exposing Ivy's darkest secret." The next morning, the whispers were already alive. The bride's fairy tale was funded by the sister she disowned, the headlines murmured online. Guests posted pictures, captions dripping with irony. Ivy's friends shared stories of my absence on social media, asking why her own sister had been seated near the restrooms. What had begun as ridicule toward me had curdled into disgust toward her. By afternoon, Nathan's family had called for a meeting. Their concern was not sentiment, it was business. They demanded receipts, details of how the wedding had been paid for. Ivy tried to spin lies, but her explanations tangled into knots. My contributions could not be erased, the trail was too clear. And then came the second blow. Reporters uncovered financial records linking Ivy to a small charity fund she had once managed. Donations had disappeared, redirected into her accounts. For months, she had used that money to prop up her glittering lifestyle. The discovery spread like wildfire. Screenshots of transfers, testimonies from former volunteers, stories of children left without support, all tied to her name. Nathan's father slammed the door on their engagement. "We will not attach ourselves to scandal," he declared coldly, his voice echoing through the marble foyer. Nathan stood stiff beside him, his eyes hardened, his loyalty evaporating with each new headline. Ivy's cries filled the hall. She begged, pleaded, insisted she was framed. But the evidence was merciless. Guests who had once adored her now recoiled, their admiration curdling into disgust. And I remained silent, not gloating, not vindictive, just watching as the golden child's empire, built on lies, greed, and my sacrifices, began to crumble. And suddenly, her perfect empire began to crack. The fall was quicker than even I expected. Scandal is like fire. Once sparked, it devours everything in its path. By the end of the week, Nathan's family had announced the engagement was canceled. Their statement was crisp, formal, and merciless. Due to irreconcilable differences and recent revelations, the union will not proceed. They never mentioned Ivy by name, but the world knew. Ivy's sobs filled the phone lines, her attempts at damage control dripping with desperation. But Nathan had already disappeared from her side. He unfollowed her on every platform, erased her pictures, and cut off all contact. To him, she was no longer a fiancée, just a liability. The business consequences were swift. Lucas, true to his word, withdrew his pending contracts with Nathan's father. Without that anchor, their company staggered. Investors pulled out, wary of association with scandal. Stock prices dipped, deals collapsed. What had once seemed untouchable was suddenly fragile. And Ivy? She lost everything faster than she could beg for it back. The charities she once pretended to champion condemned her publicly. Former friends abandoned her, deleting their pictures together, pretending they had never known her. The glamorous lifestyle she flaunted turned into a spectacle of disgrace. Her title of princess was gone. Now she was a cautionary tale. I should have felt triumphant. For years I had endured her disdain, her cruelty, her contempt. Now she stood exposed, stripped of every mask. But the truth is, watching her crumble didn't bring the joy I thought it would. It was heavy, messy, complicated. Because beneath the anger, there was still the shadow of that little girl I once carried on my hip, the child who had clung to me in the dark. The cruelest punishment wasn't losing Nathan. It was losing her own mother. Our mother had spent years feeding Ivy's illusions, building her pedestal, assuring her she was destined for greatness. But when the pedestal cracked, she was the first to step back. I overheard the conversation one evening. Her voice was sharp, cold, unrecognizable. "You've ruined everything. Do you know what chance we lost because of you? Do you realize what Nathan's family could have given us? You selfish girl." Ivy begged, her voice breaking, but our mother only scoffed. "Don't come to me with your tears. You made this mess, and you'll live with it." For the first time, Ivy was alone. Her beauty, her charm, her arrogance, none of it mattered now. She had gambled with greed and pride, and lost, and the very people who once applauded her now turned their backs without hesitation. Relatives began to reach out to me instead. Quietly, cautiously, they apologized. "We should have treated you better, Claire," one cousin murmured. Another aunt whispered, "You were always the one who held us together. We just didn't see it." Their words were too little, too late. They wanted redemption without cost, forgiveness without consequence. I listened politely but offered no comfort. Recognition after betrayal was nothing more than salt in an old wound. Ivy, meanwhile, clung to the last thread she had left. Me. She came to my apartment one night, mascara streaked, her designer dress wrinkled, her shoes scuffed, her eyes were red, her voice raw. "Claire," she choked, collapsing at my door. "Please, help me. Talk to Lucas. Tell Nathan's family I'm not what they think. You're the only one who can save me." Her words twisted in my chest. For years, I had been her safety net, the one who patched her mistakes, shielded her from storms, bore the weight she refused to carry. Every instinct in me wanted to bend, to soften, to rescue, but I didn't. I crouched beside her, my voice low but steady. "Ivy, I carried you all my life. I gave up everything so you could shine, and you threw me away like I was nothing. I can't save you from this, not anymore." Her sobs shook the hallway, each one echoing like a memory I couldn't erase. But I stood, closed the door gently, and let her cries fade behind it. For the first time, I wasn't her safety net, and she knew it. The morning after I closed the door on Ivy, I stood in my kitchen watching the sunlight spill through the blinds. My son shuffled sleepily into the room, rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking out in every direction. I poured him cereal, and as he smiled at me, I realized something profound. I felt lighter. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of Ivy's life on my shoulders. It didn't mean I wasn't sad. Of course I was. A part of me would always ache for the sister I once knew, the little girl who had wrapped her arms around my neck and whispered, "Don't ever leave me." But that little girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had chosen greed, cruelty, and arrogance over family. I could mourn her without surrendering myself again. I wasn't a cold warrior, nor a heartless avenger. I was simply a woman who had finally drawn her boundary and decided never to erase it again. That realization was my transformation. Days passed, then weeks. Ivy's scandal continued to dominate headlines, but my name slowly emerged in the background. Reporters dug into the story of the forgotten sister who had quietly financed the wedding, who had worked ordinary jobs while supporting the golden child. Some painted me as a victim, others as a symbol of resilience. I didn't chase the narrative. I simply lived. Lucas visited often, not as a savior swooping in, but as an equal. One evening, he sat across from me at my small dining table, sipping coffee. "Claire," he said, his voice measured, "I want you to consider something. Hale International is expanding. We need voices like yours, grounded, steady, sharp. I'd like you to join us, not as an employee, as a stakeholder." I nearly dropped my cup. A stakeholder? Yes, he replied, unwavering. You've invested in everyone else your whole life. Isn't it time you invested in yourself? His words burrowed into me. For years, I had funneled my money, energy, and love into others, into Ivy, into my mother, into holding a fractured family together. I had never considered what I could build if I poured that energy back into myself. Slowly, I nodded. Signing those papers was more than a business decision. It was a reclamation of my worth. For the first time, I wasn't sacrificing for someone else. I was building for me, for my son, for the life we deserved. The transformation wasn't overnight. Some days guilt crept in, whispering that I had abandoned Ivy. But then I remembered the years of humiliation, the countless times she had dismissed me, used me, erased me. Setting boundaries wasn't cruelty, it was survival. And just when I thought the chapter was over, life handed me a second chance at love. Lucas wasn't perfect, and neither was I. But as we worked together, laughter slipped easily between us. He made dinner in my kitchen, clumsy with the spices but determined. He played board games with my son, losing on purpose just to see him laugh. And sometimes, when the night was quiet, he looked at me with an affection that was patient, not demanding. For the first time, love didn't feel like a compromise. It felt like possibility. Meanwhile, Ivy's world collapsed further. Friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with her disgrace. Former admirers gossiped about her downfall, the same mouths that once praised her beauty now sneering at her hypocrisy. Job offers evaporated. Her name became synonymous with scandal, her reputation poisoned beyond repair. I saw her once, months later, in a grocery store. She looked smaller somehow, her once perfect hair limp, her eyes hollow. She froze when she saw me, clutching a basket of cheap food, as though it might shield her. For a fleeting moment, I saw the little girl again, the one who had once depended on me. But I didn't speak. I gave her a nod, nothing more, and walked away. That was my justice. Not revenge, but indifference. My life settled into a rhythm of quiet strength. Work flourished, my son thrived, and for the first time, I allowed myself to dream without shame. The whispers of the past still echoed, but they no longer ruled me. Revenge isn't about destruction. Sometimes it's about rebuilding yourself so strong they collapse under their own weight. That was the lesson Ivy never learned, and the one I had finally embraced, because when the dust settled, she was left with nothing but the ruins of her arrogance, while I stood with everything I had built anew, dignity, love, and a future I could finally call mine. And tell me, if you were me, would you have done the same?